Well, let's cross to Oxford. Let's bring in Dr. Samuel Ramani. He's an Associate Fellow of the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI. Dr. Ramani, we've heard in Israel the past few days what they call the Quint, the five countries of Western leaders. We've seen in Germany Olaf Scholz go to Tel Aviv, speak to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Then we saw this potentially one that mattered for a lot, Joe Biden saying that he'd able to get a crossing frontier open for at least 20 trucks. Then the British, Rishi Sunak in the past 24 hours, potentially Emmanuel Macron here in France travelling, and maybe Italians as well. Do you think that will basically stall any potential offensive? What's your analysis on when that could start?
Well, I think the Western countries have probably accepted the fact that an Israeli ground offensive of some kind is inevitable. I mean, it was pretty clear from the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant's statement today that they are planning for what he called fire strikes and tactical maneuvers into Gaza as the first stage of their military operation. But they're trying to delay the start of the ground invasion as much as possible, at least until there is more humanitarian aid across the Rafah crossing and there's a greater resettlement of people from northern Gaza to the south.
Do you think there's a link? And give me a sense of how much you think is hyperbole, how much you think is propaganda, and how much you think is a real threat from the Iranians saying that there will be a preemptive strike, from the threat from Hezbollah that some of the generals have said that if there is a ground war, then Hezbollah fighters will increase on the border. How much do you think is propaganda, and how much do you think you would really seriously believe that could be more than one front for Israel here?
Well, we've seen Iran make threats about dragging Israeli-Gaza clashes into a broader war before, especially when you have hardline governments in power. Like when there was a war in 2008 and 2009, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was president and conveying a similar narrative. We saw similar rhetoric coming through in 2021 and even in 2022 when there were some small skirmishes between Israel and Islamic Jihad. So we should be skeptical, but I think that certainly there will be attempts by the Iranian proxy groups to launch attacks on Israeli and American military infrastructure. We already saw the Houthi attack that was aimed at Israel, allegedly. We saw the Iraqis crossing and attacking the American base there, which was also attacked by the Iranians after Soleimani was killed, and attacks on the Lebanese borders. I don't know right now whether we can say that this is going to lead to the opening of multiple fronts, or whether it'll just be periodic strikes across, but the risk of a broader war is growing.
I noticed that President Biden, in returning to the US and giving the speech from the Oval Office, saying to Israel, do not do the same mistakes out of anger, out of hatred, out of revenge that we made in Afghanistan and Iraq after the 9/11 attacks. I mean, how much, given that there's more time that's been delaying the potential incursion, is there more time for reflective voices, thinkers in the cabinet to work this out?
Well, I mean, I think that also it's not that much of a delay because the U.S. response, of course, to 9/11 was not immediate, right? It took a period of a few weeks before the U.S. was really actually invading Afghanistan and overthrowing the Taliban, and then the Iraq War occurred about 18 months later. So Israel is still operating under a very narrow window of time. The wounds of the terrorist attacks are still very fresh, and there doesn't seem to be any voices inside Netanyahu's inner circle. If you listen to Gallant today, for example, really calling for a de-escalation or a hold-off on a ground invasion. The only area where the Israelis are being measured, and Gallant was very specific about ruling out, was an occupation of the Gaza Strip, but that's once the war is over. So I think that the Israeli government is firmly committed to carrying out this ground invasion, but it wants to do so, hopefully, without the burdens of a long-term occupation.
Samuel, thank you. Dr. Samuel Ramani at RUSI in Oxford.